Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into the absolutely incredible, and honestly, highly ironic, story of Matthew Flinders. We're talking about a guy whose life was a tale of absolute extremes. I mean, here's a historical figure who secured his legacy by literally defining the shape of an entire continent, only to have his own personal world brutally shrunk down to a few inescapable square miles. It is a crazy story of discovery, disaster, and just immense personal resilience. Okay, let's dive right into this, because the sheer whiplash of Flinders' life is just staggering. Just imagine having the unbelievable skill and the limitless freedom to navigate and map the massive, completely uncharted coastlines of the globe, and then having all of that snatched away, resulting in total heartbreaking confinement. So how exactly does the ultimate explorer become the ultimate prisoner? Well, to understand that, we first have to look at the absolute peak of his career. Section 1. Charting a vast unknown. A circumnavigation that changed the map. So, between 1801 and 1803, Flinders was appointed commander of the HMS Investigator. His mission from the British Admiralty was massive. He had to sail around these newly discovered lands and figure out if New Holland in the west and New South Wales in the east were separate landmasses divided by a strait, or just one giant continuous continent. And this brilliantly illustrates the intense geopolitical pressures of the era. You see, England and France were essentially racing each other to map this part of the world. Even though they were rival nations, often actively at war, science usually allowed them a sort of diplomatic immunity. When Flinders and the Investigator met the French explorer Nicolas Baudin in Le Géographe off the southern coast, it was this incredible moment of mutual discovery. But make no mistake, it was also a super high-stakes game to claim sovereignty and scientific glory for their own countries. Now, despite all those intense pressures, Flinders' achievements were absolutely staggering. His work is considered the literal centerpiece of Australian coastal discovery. To put it into perspective, the sheer magnitude and accuracy of his navigational skills were so far ahead of his time, the maps he prepared during this voyage were actually still being used as authoritative sea charts until 1947. That is wild. He worked under incredibly difficult conditions to finally prove that Australia was in fact a single vast landmass. But literally just as he achieved this monumental triumph, the universe completely turned against him. Section 2. A desperate, leaky detour. From triumph to disaster. And I have to warn you, the rapid change in his luck here is almost unbelievable. If you wrote this into a movie script, people would honestly say it was way too unrealistic. Just take a look at this rapid-fire chain of bad luck. In June 1803, his ship, the Investigator, is found to be rotting and is condemned as totally unseaworthy. So he boards the HMS Porpoise as a passenger just to get back to England. But then, in August, the Porpoise gets shipwrecked on a reef. Flinders heroically sails a tiny cutter hundreds of miles back to Sydney to organize a rescue for his stranded crew. Then, desperately trying to get his vital charts back to the Admiralty, he takes command of a tiny 29-ton schooner called the Cumberland in September. But the Cumberland is terribly leaky. The punks break down, and by December 1803, he's literally forced to stop for urgent repairs at the French outpost of Mauritius. The big problem here? He had absolutely no idea that the fragile peace between Britain and France had broken, and they were back at war. Section 3. Prisoner of Mauritius. A fatal clash of egos. So what really should have been a standard request for a ship in distress turned into a fatal clash. The core conflict on the island was just a tragic misunderstanding fueled heavily by stubbornness on both sides. Flinders arrived thinking he was a protected scientist. He had a French passport guaranteeing safe passage for his exploratory work. But there was a massive catch. That passport was specifically for the ship Investigator, and he showed up in the leaky little Cumberland. On the other side of this, we have the French governor, General Charles Duquesne. Duquesne is this experienced, prickly soldier managing a very vulnerable island during wartime. He sees an English naval officer showing up in the wrong ship, asking suspicious questions. And when Duquesne invited Flinders to dinner, Flinders, feeling totally insulted by being questioned in the first place, bluntly refused the invitation unless he was completely set free. Well, Duquesne saw this as a massive affront. And because of this stubborn clash, Flinders was locked up in a dirty tavern, besieged by bugs and mosquitoes, officially treated as a spy. And to really ground the dense historical politics of this whole situation, we have to talk about his cat. Yes, Flinders had a beloved seafaring cat named Trim, who had survived the circumnavigation and the shipwrecks right alongside him. While imprisoned on the island, Flinders allowed Trim to be taken in by a local French family as a companion for a little girl, genuinely thinking it would be safer for him. But within weeks, Trim vanished. Flinders was utterly heartbroken. He offered a massive reward of 10 Spanish dollars, but it was no use. He actually later wrote in his journals that his excellent, unsuspecting animal was likely caught and eaten by starving slaves on the island. It's just a devastating, intensely personal blow right on top of losing his own freedom. So the crucial point is the sheer agony of this captivity. Flinders was held prisoner for 6.5 long years. That meant he was separated from his beloved wife for a total of 9 years. And what makes this even more tragic is that the scientific community back in Europe actually rallied for him. In 1806, the French government, specifically Napoleon himself, issued an order for Flinders to be released. But General Decaen totally defied Napoleon and kept him locked up anyway. Why? Because after spending years on the island, Flinders now knew way too much about Mauritius's weak military defenses. If Decaen let him go, Flinders could tell the British Navy exactly how to capture the island. So, in a bitter irony, his own knowledge is what kept him in a cage. Section 4. The Legacy of Australia. Freedom and a Final Magnum Opus. Flinders was finally granted his freedom in 1810, mostly because a British naval blockade made it basically impossible for the French to hold the island anymore. He returned to England a physically broken man. Which brings us to a really compelling question. What did Flinders do with his final years of freedom? Did he rest? Did he retire to the countryside to recover his health? Actually, not at all. He spent literally every waking moment furiously writing his life's masterwork, A Voyage to Terra Australis, while his health was rapidly failing. It was in this very work that he passionately advocated for the continent to be officially named Australia. He argued it just sounded much more agreeable to the ear than New Holland. His work was monumental, complete with an atlas, detailed maps, and rich scientific appendices. But tragically, the book was finally published on July 18, 1814, and Matthew Flinders died the very next day, at the age of just 40. He never lived to see the name he championed officially adopted by the rest of the world. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. Will we ever fully appreciate the human cost behind the maps that shape our world? Because when we look at a map of Australia today, we just see clean lines and familiar names. We rarely see the leaky ships, the brutal shipwrecks, the geopolitical ego clashes, the loss of a beloved cat, or the 6.5 years of agonizing captivity that went into drawing those exact lines. Matthew Flinders literally gave everything to his discoveries. I hope this explainer has sparked your curiosity to look a little closer at the maritime history beneath our feet and our maps. Thanks so much for joining me.